I stood on the front porch of my parents' house with the rain soaking through my coat, suitcase handle trembling in my grip, and a knot in my throat that I couldn't swallow down. The yellow porch light flickered above me like it too was undecided whether to welcome me or drive me away. I had imagined this moment differently, foolishly rehearsed in my mind that maybe my mother would gasp and pull me inside, that maybe my father would say, "You've come home, Stella," as if those words could fix the cracks in my heart. Instead, I was staring at a closed door, the faint shadow of my parents moving behind frosted glass. I had rung the bell, I had knocked, I had even whispered, "Please," but all I received was silence so thick it made my chest burn. When the door finally opened, it wasn't with warmth. My father stood there, jaw tight, eyes cold, and said the sentence that would bruise me forever. "Stella, we don't have room for you here." The words didn't make sense at first, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. I blinked, rain running down my face, unsure if it was water or tears. My own parents, people who had raised me or at least housed me, were telling me I had no place with them. I wanted to argue, to shout, to remind them that I was their daughter, flesh of their flesh. But the words stuck inside my chest, trapped behind a lifetime of silence I had practiced since childhood. My mother appeared beside him, lips pressed thin like she had rehearsed the same refusal in the mirror. She didn't even meet my eyes, and that small act of avoidance cut deeper than the outright rejection. I managed a broken, "I just need a place for tonight," but the door began closing before I could finish. My parents' silhouettes faded back into the glow of the house, leaving me outside with nothing but the sound of rain and the weight of my own disbelief. I dragged my suitcase down the porch steps, as if it weighed 100 pounds, though it contained only a few changes of clothes and the remnants of my life that felt worth carrying. My shoes squelched in the mud as I reached the curb, and I thought of the cruel irony. I was a woman who had won millions, yet I had nowhere to sleep. The check, the numbers, the surreal rush of being chosen by fate, it all felt like some private hallucination now. The secret lay folded in my wallet, silent and suffocating, like it mocked me for not using it. I had hidden it from them because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could give. And now, standing homeless in front of the house that once contained my childhood, I wondered if that choice had destroyed me. The rain smelled of wet asphalt and betrayal, and as I pulled the hood of my coat tighter, I caught myself staring at the upstairs window where Emily's light glowed warmly. My younger sister, the one who had always been the shining star, was probably sitting in her room, scrolling through her phone, blissfully unaware that her sister was standing outside in the storm. I knew she would have been welcomed home. No questions asked, no hesitation. But I was different. I had always been different. To them, Emily was promise and pride, and I was complication. That realization, though old as my bones, still managed to sting with the freshness of a reopened wound. I turned away from the house, because standing there any longer felt like begging, and I had begged enough in my lifetime. The streets were nearly empty, just the occasional headlights slicing through the darkness, and I walked without knowing where I was going. Every drop of rain seemed to drum the same question against my skull. Why don't they want me? It wasn't money. It wasn't space. It wasn't even logic. It was something deeper, uglier, a wound carved into the family years ago. My suitcase wheels rattled against uneven pavement, echoing like applause for a cruel joke. I thought of how I had once daydreamed that winning the lottery would change everything, that it would prove I was worthy, that it would somehow tilt the balance in my favor. But what good was fortune if the people you craved most couldn't spare you a bed, a blanket, a shred of affection? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification I didn't dare check. Probably some automated message reminding me about bills I no longer had to fear, or perhaps Daniel reaching out with one of his check-in texts. He was the only person who seemed to notice when I slipped from the world, but I couldn't bring myself to call him. Not yet. The humiliation of being turned away by my own blood was still fresh, raw as a wound that refused to close. I told myself I would find a motel, though the thought of walking into one with damp clothes and a haunted look made my stomach knot. Still, it was better than standing here, at the threshold of a family who had already buried me in their hearts. I passed a bus stop and paused under its flickering light, sheltering for a moment from the relentless downpour. The bench was wet, but I sat anyway, pulling my knees close, trying to make myself small. Around me, the city kept moving, indifferent to my despair. Cars sped by, their taillights blurring into streaks of red. A woman with an umbrella rushed past, barely sparing me a glance. I wondered if anyone could tell that I was carrying a secret worth millions, or if I simply looked like every other lost soul in the night. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh, but the sound died in my throat before it could escape. Laughter felt like a betrayal to the girl inside me, who had always wanted nothing more than to belong. A memory rose unbidden. Me as a child, standing on the same porch, clutching a school project I was proud of, waiting for my parents to notice. Emily had been in the kitchen, showing off some drawing, and they had fawned over her while I stood in the corner, invisible. That night I had gone to bed telling myself, tomorrow they'll see me. Decades later, here I was, standing outside the same house, still waiting, still unseen. The cruel symmetry of it made my chest tighten, and I realized with a clarity that felt like lightning, they had never wanted me, not then, not now, and perhaps not ever. I leaned back against the cold metal of the bus shelter, rain hammering above me like an impatient drum. The suitcase sat by my side like an anchor to a past I hadn't cut loose. Inside, it wasn't just clothing. It was the fragments of someone desperate to rebuild, someone who still clung to the possibility of family. I knew I couldn't sit there forever. Eventually, I would have to stand up, decide where to go, decide who I would trust with the truth I carried. But in that moment, as the night deepened and the rain kept falling, I allowed myself the luxury of sorrow. Because what hurt most wasn't the rejection itself. It was realizing that even if I had told them about the millions, even if I had offered them the world, their answer would still have been no. And that was the first time I truly understood what it meant to be both rich and poor at the same time. Wealthy enough to buy anything, yet too worthless to be given a place to sleep in my own parents' home. When I was a child, the house I had just been turned away from was a stage where I never seemed to get a role. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, knees swinging, waiting for someone to notice the stories I scribbled in my notebooks. Emily would arrive minutes later, her hair shining, her smile rehearsed, and suddenly the whole room would ignite with warmth. My mother would lean forward, her eyes wide with pride, and my father would nod as if Emily had just announced a cure for a disease. In those moments, I would fade like wallpaper, still present, still breathing, but irrelevant. That invisibility followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Even now, after all the years, it clung to me on that rainy night like a curse stitched into my skin. It's strange how the mind preserves certain wounds with more precision than joys. I can hardly recall the laughter of my childhood, but I can still feel the sting of my father's voice calling me a dreamer in that tone which was never admiration, only dismissal. My mother once told me, "You have to be realistic, Stella. Life doesn't reward people like you." She said it while folding Emily's recital dress, her hands smoothing the fabric with such tenderness it nearly broke me. I internalized those words so deeply that even winning the lottery felt like a mistake, like something undeserved that I would eventually be punished for. It wasn't just neglect. It was a steady chiseling away of my worth until I became convinced I was hollow. Emily, for her part, never meant to wound me. She was simply the sun they revolved around, and I was left to find light in scraps of reflection. She would beam when she came home with perfect grades, or when her latest boyfriend showered her with compliments, and my parents would practically glow as if basking in her radiance. I don't think she ever understood that. In their devotion to her, they were starving me. Sometimes she'd share a smile with me, a slice of her endless confidence, and for a fleeting second I would feel seen. But then she'd run back into their embrace, and I would be forgotten all over again. Love, in that house, was not something evenly distributed. It was hoarded, rationed, and I always ended up with the crumbs. There were nights I used to stand at my window, watching the stars, wondering if somewhere out there existed a world where I belonged. Other kids my age spoke of birthday parties, of parents who cheered from the sidelines of soccer games. I stopped inviting my parents to my school plays after realizing they always found an excuse not to come. Busy, tired, maybe next time. Those words became the soundtrack of my growing up, and so I learned to stop asking, because rejection had a way of bruising more each time it arrived. Silence became my shield, but also my prison. By the time I reached adulthood, I had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. Perhaps that was why winning the lottery felt less like triumph and more like irony. Here I was, a woman taught to expect nothing, suddenly holding a ticket worth millions. It should have been validation, a loud announcement that I mattered. But when I thought of telling my parents, I heard their voices in my head, not celebrating, but calculating, dissecting what they could take from me. That fear was so sharp, it eclipsed the joy. I decided then that the money would remain my secret, tucked into silence, just as I had been all my life. If they didn't want me when I had nothing, they didn't deserve me when I had everything. Yet beneath that conviction, a small part of me still longed for their love. That contradiction gnawed at me until it felt like my heart was split in two. There's a photograph on my mother's mantelpiece of Emily at her high school graduation, cap tilted just so, smile like it had been carved by angels. My mother keeps it polished, the frame gleaming under the light. There is no picture of me in that room. My own graduation photo was lost, or so she claimed, though I suspect it was simply never framed. That absence burned more than any insult could, because it wasn't hatred, it was erasure. To not exist in the memories of your own family is a kind of death, one that leaves you walking the earth with no proof that you ever mattered. I used to stare at that mantel when I visited, willing my face to appear, but the wall never changed. My father, Robert, was not cruel in the obvious sense. He never raised his hand to me, never shouted unnecessarily. His cruelty was in the indifference, the way he looked past me as though I was an inconvenient detail in the background of his carefully arranged life. He valued achievement, discipline, results. Emily gave him all of that, wrapped in a bow of charm and beauty. I, on the other hand, gave him questions, stories, daydreams, things that couldn't be measured or weighed. And so, he dismissed me. Not with anger, but with absence. Sometimes I wonder if that absence was worse. Because how do you fight for acknowledgement from someone who pretends you don't exist? When I finally left home, I carried little more than a duffel bag, and the certainty that I would never be enough. I worked odd jobs, scraped by, and convinced myself that one day I would create a life that made sense, even if I had to build it from dust. But the ache for family never left me. I told myself that maybe, if I proved myself, if I returned with accomplishments they couldn't ignore, the door would open. That's why their rejection cut so deep when I stood there in the rain. Because even though I had pretended otherwise, a part of me had still believed in redemption. And that part died when they told me there was no room for me. Now, sitting in the quiet aftermath of that night, I see how the patterns of my past had prepared me for this moment. Rejection was not new, only louder this time. I had spent years trying to be seen, when perhaps what I needed all along was to see myself. Yet it's difficult to unlearn the hunger for belonging, especially when it's tied to the people who gave you life. Their voices still echo in me, sharp as ever, and I wonder if they will haunt me until the end. The bonds between us were fractured long before I stood on that porch, but now I realize they may never have been whole to begin with. The night I won the lottery, I was sitting alone in my apartment with the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I had bought the ticket on a whim, the way some people toss coins into fountains, expecting nothing, hoping for a miracle they don't believe in. When the numbers began to match, one after the other, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke, that the universe was dangling hope before me only to snatch it away. But when the final number aligned, when the announcer's voice grew electric, I dropped the ticket onto the floor and just stared. My hands shook so violently I could hardly breathe. I laughed and cried at once, a sound too jagged to be either joy or despair. In that moment, my life split into two timelines, before and after. The first thing I did was sit in the dark and imagine what people would say. I pictured Emily's delighted squeal, her eyes already calculating how to spend my fortune. I saw my father's stern expression softening only because of the money, not because of me. And my mother, her sudden affection would feel like an insult, a love rented by dollar signs. The thought sickened me. For years I had prayed for their recognition, and now fate had handed me a counterfeit version of it. I realized that telling them would erase the only test left to prove whether their love was ever real. I wanted desperately to believe I was worth something without the millions. And so, I folded the secret into silence. In the days that followed, the ticket sat in a shoebox under my bed, wrapped in a scarf like a fragile relic. I would take it out sometimes just to confirm it existed, that I hadn't dreamt it. Holding it gave me a strange kind of power, but also a burden so heavy it pressed against my ribs. With every news report about the mystery winner, I felt a mixture of pride and terror. Strangers speculated, gossip spun like wildfire, yet none of them looked twice at me, the quiet woman slipping through the grocery store aisles. That anonymity was both a shield and a curse. I was invisible, but I was safe. When the money was finally deposited into accounts under careful arrangements, I felt the sheer weight of possibility crash into me. I could go anywhere, be anyone, buy the world's affection if I chose. But I found myself frozen, paralyzed by the fear that I didn't deserve it. I lived in a bare apartment, furniture scuffed, curtains thin, because part of me was afraid that changing my surroundings would expose me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the same woman my parents had overlooked, not a millionaire. I couldn't reconcile the numbers in my account with the girl who used to eat dinner alone in her room. Money had changed everything, yet it had changed nothing at all. People imagined sudden wealth as freedom, but for me, it was isolation magnified. I couldn't confide in coworkers. They complained about rent while I silently carried a fortune. I couldn't tell friends without fearing their gaze would shift, curiosity replacing care. Even Daniel, who had been my anchor for years, was left in the dark. He deserved to know, perhaps, but trust had always been a fragile thing for me, chipped away since childhood. I told myself silence was safer, and maybe it was. But silence is also lonely. It echoes in ways that make you question whether your voice matters at all. I began to test my power in secret ways. Small donations slipped into envelopes, grocery bills paid for strangers, checks sent anonymously to shelters. Watching someone's relief from the shadows gave me a sense of worth I couldn't find anywhere else. It was as if I was proving to myself that the money wasn't cursed, that it could do what I had always wanted to, make someone's life easier, kinder, brighter. Yet each act of kindness deepened the ache in me, because I knew I was giving strangers what my own family never would, care without conditions. Generosity poured from me, but love still eluded me. There were nights when I dreamed of storming back into that house, slamming the check on the table and demanding, "Do you see me now?" In those fantasies, their faces would crumble, guilt washing over them as they begged forgiveness. But every time I awoke, reality was sharper. Money could buy their attention, but not their love, and I feared that if I gave them the chance, they would choose the money and prove every suspicion right. Better to be rejected for being poor than accepted for being rich under false pretenses. That conviction became the wall I hid behind, even as it suffocated me. Still, I couldn't shake the yearning. I told myself that maybe, someday, the right moment would come, when honesty wouldn't feel like a trap. Until then, the millions remained an unspoken truth, stitched into the fabric of my days. I carried it like a secret flame, bright, dangerous, always threatening to burn through the silence. And yet, no matter how much I told myself I was protecting my heart, deep down, I knew the real reason I kept it hidden. I was afraid that even with millions in my hands, I still wouldn't be enough for them. And on that rainy night, when I stood on their porch begging for a place to sleep, I realized that my silence hadn't saved me from that truth. It had only delayed it, because their rejection proved what I had feared all along. The money had never mattered. To them, I had never mattered. By the time I reached Daniel's apartment, my clothes clung to me like second skin, cold and heavy, my suitcase handle slick from rain. I hadn't planned on coming here. Pride told me to find a motel, to bury my humiliation in anonymity. But my legs had carried me to his street, like they remembered the way better than my heart did. Standing outside his door, I hesitated, torn between knocking and turning back. Daniel had always been kind, the one constant thread in my tangled life, but kindness was harder to face when you felt like a failure. Still, the thought of another closed door filled me with dread. My knuckles met the wood before I could stop myself. When he opened the door, warmth rushed out like a tide, smelling faintly of coffee and cedar. Daniel blinked in surprise at the sight of me, drenched, shivering, suitcase at my side, but his expression softened almost instantly. "Stella," he said, my name carrying something I hadn't heard all night. "Welcome." He didn't ask why I was there, didn't demand explanations. He simply stepped aside, motioning me in with the ease of someone who had been waiting for me without knowing it. I crossed the threshold, my chest tightening, half expecting him to change his mind. But Daniel only closed the door gently, sealing me inside with warmth I hadn't felt in years. His apartment was modest but alive, cluttered with books and sketches pinned to the walls, the kind of space that felt lived in rather than displayed. A mismatched couch faced a coffee table scarred with rings from countless mugs, and the faint hum of jazz played from a speaker in the corner. It was nothing like the sterile order of my parents' house. Here, imperfection was allowed to exist, even celebrated. Daniel handed me a towel, his brow furrowed with concern. "You're freezing," he said, his voice low but steady. I pressed the fabric to my face, inhaling the scent of detergent and something distinctly him, and for a moment, I felt the urge to cry. I wanted to tell him everything right then. The rejection at my parents' door, the secret fortune burning in my bank account, the ache that had no cure. But words stuck to my throat like thorns. Instead, I muttered. I didn't know where else to go. Daniel's eyes softened further, and he simply replied, "You don't need anywhere else." He said it as if it were the most natural truth in the world, as though I belonged here without question. That sentence pressed into me like a balm on a wound, soothing, but almost painful in its unfamiliarity. I wondered what it would be like to live in a world where that kind of belonging wasn't rare, but ordinary. He made me tea while I changed into dry clothes he lent me, an oversized hoodie that swallowed me whole, and sweatpants tied loosely at the waist. I looked absurd, like a child dressing in borrowed skin, but I felt safe. Sitting on his couch with the steam curling from the mug in my hands, I finally let the silence stretch between us. Daniel didn't pry, though his gaze lingered, gentle but searching, as if waiting for me to decide how much of myself to reveal. That patience unnerved me, because I wasn't used to it. My family had always demanded explanations, performances, proof of worth, but Daniel asked for nothing. That nothing was everything. Eventually, he spoke. "Do you want to talk about it?" The question hung in the air, light but impossible to ignore. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "My parents turned me away." The word sounded small, pathetic, stripped of the storm that had carried me there. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't respond with disbelief. Instead, he sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed, and said, "Then they're fools." The simplicity of it unraveled something inside me. For years, I had twisted myself into knots trying to understand what was wrong with me. But here was Daniel, cutting through the noise with a single steady truth. I studied him in the soft light, the curve of his jaw, the faint stubble, the lines of fatigue etched into his face. He wasn't perfect, not in the polished way Emily's boyfriends had been. He was real, solid, someone who had seen me at my worst and still opened the door. There was a kind of quiet loyalty in him, a loyalty I had never dared expect from anyone. For the first time in a long while, I let myself lean slightly toward another human being, resting in the certainty that he wouldn't push me away. That realization scared me, because it meant I was still capable of trusting, and trust had always been the most dangerous gamble of all. We talked for hours, though not about the lottery, not about the millions that pulsed like a secret vein inside me. Instead, we spoke of smaller things, books, music, memories of our teenage years when we had shared stolen cigarettes behind the school gym. Laughter crept between us in cautious doses, as if testing whether it still belonged. With each passing moment, I felt the weight of the storm outside grow lighter, though I knew the storm within me still raged. Daniel didn't fix me. He didn't try. He simply sat there, a steady presence, reminding me that maybe not everyone closed their doors. That night, when I lay on his couch wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of pine, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain easing against the windows. My parents' rejection still throbbed in me like a bruise, but Daniel's acceptance layered over it like gauze. I knew this was temporary. I couldn't stay here forever, couldn't keep hiding my fortune, couldn't keep dodging the truth of who I was. But for one night, I allowed myself the comfort of believing I was safe, and as sleep pulled me under, I clung to the fragile thought that maybe, just maybe, I was not as alone as I had always believed. I shouldn't have gone, but when Emily called and chirped, "We're having dinner, you should come," I heard myself agreeing before my brain could intervene. Maybe I was curious, maybe I wanted to test if the sting of rejection still lingered, or maybe I was just desperate for any piece of belonging, however jagged. Daniel had offered to keep me company that night, sensing my reluctance, but I told him I needed to face them. He nodded, though his eyes betrayed worry I tried to ignore. By the time I arrived at my parents' house, the lights glowed warmly, the table already set, the smell of roasted meat drifting through the air. It all looked like the perfect family gathering, if only I wasn't part of it. Emily greeted me at the door with her usual radiance, her hair styled effortlessly, her perfume sweet and expensive. She hugged me lightly, as though we were strangers meeting at a polite function rather than sisters. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice tinged with surprise, though she didn't ask where I'd been sleeping since the stormy night. Behind her, my mother appeared, smoothing her apron with hands that smelled faintly of rosemary. "Don't drip water on the floor, Stella," she murmured, though I was perfectly dry. It wasn't a greeting. It was a correction. My father didn't even rise from his seat, simply gave me a nod as if I were a late employee arriving to a meeting. The air was thick with familiarity, the kind that suffocates. The table was a picture of domestic perfection: polished cutlery, crystal glasses, candles flickering. Emily took the seat beside my mother, as she always had, glowing in the center of their attention. I slid into a chair at the far end, where shadows pooled and conversation struggled to reach. My father carved the roast, handing Emily the first plate, his voice warm as he asked about her new internship. She launched into a story about her boss's admiration for her work, her laughter bubbling like champagne. My mother clapped her hands, eyes shining, as if Emily had already conquered the world. I sat silent, cutting food into small pieces I barely tasted, my presence more ghost than guest. At one point, my mother turned to me, her smile polite but thin. "So, Stella, are you working anywhere these days?" The question dangled like a noose, her tone already expecting failure. Heat crept into my cheeks, not because I lacked an answer, but because the answer wouldn't matter. "I'm between things," I said quietly, though the truth was I could have bought the entire street with what sat in my accounts. My father cleared his throat, unimpressed. Emily smoothed over the silence by announcing a new project at her office, and once again, the room lit up as if she were the only star worth orbiting. My invisibility was restored with casual precision. The cruelest part wasn't their words, but the ease of their exclusion. I wasn't mocked, not openly scorned, but erased in subtler strokes. The way their eyes lingered longer on Emily, the way laughter swelled when she spoke, but dimmed when I tried. I found myself shrinking, pulling inward, measuring my breaths so they wouldn't interrupt the symphony of their admiration. I remembered being a child at this very table, knees barely reaching the chair edge, waiting for someone to notice me. Decades later, nothing had changed. The food on my plate tasted of sawdust, and my stomach clenched with every forced smile I offered. When dessert came, a rich cake Emily had baked, my mother beamed as though her daughter had invented sugar. "You've always been so talented," she gushed, sliding the knife carefully to give Emily the largest slice. I received a sliver so thin it could barely hold a candle. I laughed inwardly at the metaphor. My place in this family distilled into pastry, crumbs while Emily feasted. No one noticed my plate. No one asked if I wanted more. I thought of the donations I had made in secret, the hungry mouths I had fed with my hidden millions, and wondered why feeding strangers filled me with more purpose than sitting here with my own blood. At one point, I excused myself to the bathroom, gripping the sink as my reflection wavered in the mirror. My face looked pale, my eyes hollow, as though the evening had drained the life from me. I whispered to myself, "You don't need this. You don't need them." But my chest betrayed me, aching with the hunger of a child who still wanted to be chosen. The walls seemed to close in, heavy with memories I wanted to escape but couldn't. I washed my hands longer than necessary, letting the water disguise the tears I refused to let fall. When I finally returned, no one had noticed my absence. The conversation spun on, dazzling without me. By the end of the night, I felt like a piece of furniture being moved around the house, necessary for function but devoid of value. Emily kissed our parents goodnight, her laughter ringing down the hall as she promised to visit again soon. My father patted her shoulder with pride. My mother clung to her arm. I slipped out quietly, suitcase still at Daniel's apartment, my place at this table once again erased. No one asked where I was going. No one cared. The door closed behind me with a click that echoed louder than their voices ever had. As I walked down the familiar street, the taste of bitterness heavy on my tongue, I realized something with painful clarity. I had tried to mask myself in their world, to blend into the performance of family, but masks only work when someone wants to see you. My parents had never looked, not really. And the cruel truth was that no amount of wealth, no desperate secret, no polished smile could force their eyes to turn my way. I was invisible to them, and perhaps I always would be. After that dinner, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me with only the shell of who I once hoped to be. Walking away from my parents' house, I realized that their rejection was not a storm that would pass. It was the climate of my life. I couldn't change them, couldn't force them to see me. But what I could change was how I spent the silence they left behind. My millions had sat idle for too long, dormant in accounts that grew larger while I grew smaller. That night, lying awake on Daniel's couch, I decided to turn my loneliness into currency, to scatter kindness where love had failed me. If my family would not give me meaning, perhaps strangers could. The next morning, I began small. I slipped into a corner cafe, paid for every order behind me, and left before anyone noticed. The barista looked bewildered, her hands fumbling with the sudden stack of receipts, but I walked out into the sunlight with a strange lightness in my chest. Later, I visited a grocery store and quietly covered the bill of a woman with 2 children tugging at her sleeve. The way her face shifted, from worry to relief, was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. I didn't stay to explain. That was the point. This wasn't about recognition. It was about giving someone else the feeling I had always craved. Soon, the acts grew larger. Anonymous checks to shelters, tuition payments left at schools, donations funneled through foundations that never asked questions. I became a ghost in my own generosity, haunting the edges of other people's lives with blessings they would never trace back to me. Each time, I felt a flicker of warmth that quickly dimmed into ache, because no matter how much I gave away, I remained untouched. The love I scattered outward never found its way back. I told myself that didn't matter, that giving was enough. But late at night, staring at the ceiling, I knew I was still starving. One afternoon, at a community center where I had quietly funded a renovation, I lingered longer than usual. Children's laughter spilled into the hallway, their shoes squeaking on the newly polished floor. That's when I noticed him, an older man sitting on a bench, cane leaning against his leg, his eyes sharper than his age suggested. He wore a faded suit jacket, threadbare at the cuffs, but his posture was dignified. "You're the one," he said when our eyes met. My heart stuttered, unsure what he meant, the one who made this happen. I tried to deflect, stammering something about volunteers and community efforts, but his gaze didn't waver. It was as though he saw through my skin, straight to the secret I guarded. His name was Mr. Lawson, a retired lawyer who volunteered at the center. He told me he had been watching the quiet miracles unfolding in the neighborhood, the sudden repairs, the unexpected funds, the whispered stories of kindness with no face attached. "Money leaves fingerprints," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, "and I've seen yours." Panic flared in me, the urge to run pressing hot against my ribs. But there was something in his tone that kept me rooted. He wasn't accusing, he was acknowledging, and for the first time, I felt the possibility that my secrecy hadn't erased me entirely, that maybe someone could see me, even when I tried to vanish. We spoke for an hour, our conversation meandering from law to literature, to the strange weight of doing good without being known. He told me about his late wife, who had believed that generosity was the purest form of rebellion against cruelty. "But generosity without connection," he said softly, "can leave you emptier than before." His words landed with uncomfortable precision, cutting to the hollow space in my chest. I wanted to tell him everything, about my parents, the rejection, the check folded like a curse in my wallet, but the old habit of silence clamped my throat shut. All I could manage was a nod. As I left the center, his gaze lingered on me with quiet understanding. I walked quickly, my pulse racing, but his words trailed after me like an echo, emptier than before. They haunted me as I made my way back to Daniel's apartment, where he greeted me with easy warmth, oblivious to the storm that brewed inside me. Part of me wanted to confide in him, to share the truth that another person had uncovered pieces of me I thought were invisible. But fear won again. I smiled, I deflected, and the secret burrowed deeper into my ribs like a splinter I couldn't extract. Yet that night, as I lay awake listening to Daniel's steady breathing in the next room, I realized something had shifted. Mr. Lawson had cracked the armor I had worn so long, reminding me that even ghosts leave traces. My generosity had not gone unnoticed, and perhaps, in being seen, I might finally find a path toward the truth I had been too afraid to share. It terrified me, the thought of exposure, but it also lit a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. And though I didn't yet know it, Mr. Lawson's quiet recognition would plant the seed of a revelation that would change everything I believed about myself, my family, and the legacy I carried without knowing. Mr. Lawson invited me to meet him a week later, his voice on the phone steady but insistent. We met at a small park on the edge of the city, where trees bent under the weight of summer's heat, and the pond shimmered like glass. He carried himself with quiet dignity, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement as he approached. "You've been carrying a secret too heavy for one person," he said without preamble, settling onto the bench beside me. His words struck me like a bell, reverberating through the walls I had built. I had spent years hiding, yet here was a stranger who saw through me as though I were transparent. I wanted to deny it, to insist he was mistaken, but the truth swelled against my chest until it was painful. "I don't know what you think you know," I murmured, my hands twisting in my lap. He smiled faintly, not unkind, as if he had seen 1,000 people try the same defense. "I was your grandmother's lawyer," he said, his voice softening. My heart lurched at the mention of her. My grandmother, Margaret, who had been the only person in my family to make me feel seen. She had died when I was barely out of high school, leaving behind little more than her books and the faint scent of lavender. My parents rarely spoke of her, dismissing her as impractical, too soft for the world. Hearing her name from Mr. Lawson's lips felt like a ghost brushing past me, carrying warmth I had almost forgotten. "She spoke of you often," he continued, his gaze steady. "She worried for you. She saw the way your parents favored Emily, the way you were left in the shadows. She wanted to make sure you would one day know your worth." His words opened a wound I hadn't realized was still raw. My throat tightened, and I wanted to ask why he was telling me this now, why he had waited so long. But the answer was in his eyes. He had seen my generosity, recognized Margaret's spirit in me, and realized it was time. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your grandmother left you something. More than money, Stella. She left you a truth your parents buried." The air seemed to thin, the world narrowing to his words. I clutched the bench until my knuckles whitened, every muscle taut with dread. "What truth?" I whispered, though a part of me didn't want to hear. Mr. Lawson exhaled slowly, as though bracing himself. "Your inheritance, the fortune you stumbled into with the lottery. Perhaps it was fate, but Margaret had already secured a future for you. She left a trust in your name, one your parents concealed. They took it, diverted it, used it for themselves. You were never supposed to struggle the way you did." His voice trembled slightly, anger beneath the calm. "They robbed you, Stella, and then they blamed you for being empty-handed." The words slammed into me like a blow. My breath hitched, the ground seeming to tilt beneath me. My parents, the ones who had told me I was irresponsible, unworthy, a burden, had stolen from me the trust, the safety my grandmother had tried to give me, swallowed by their greed. 100 moments rushed back, the times I begged for help with rent, the nights I went hungry, the humiliation of being told to grow up while they dined in comfort. Rage and sorrow tangled in my chest, sharp and suffocating. "You're lying," I said weakly, though even as I spoke, I knew he wasn't. The ache in his eyes was too real, too deliberate. Mr. Lawson placed a worn envelope on the bench between us. "This is a copy of her letter to you. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the day you were ready to see the truth." My hands shook as I reached for it, the paper fragile beneath my fingertips. I didn't open it. Couldn't, not yet. Just the weight of it was enough to make my heart pound like a war drum. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant laughter of children playing near the pond. The world felt unbearably cruel in its indifference. "Why tell me now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He studied me for a long moment before answering. "Because I see in you the same generosity she had, and I couldn't let you keep living under a lie." I walked away from the park in a daze, the envelope pressed to my chest, as though it might dissolve if I loosened my grip. My thoughts spiraled, colliding with one another until I felt dizzy. Everything I had believed about my family, about myself, was cracking apart. All those years of struggle, of begging for scraps of love, had been built on a foundation of theft and betrayal. My parents hadn't just neglected me. They had stolen the very lifeline meant to prove I was worth something. I thought of the night they turned me away at the door, their coldness, their refusal. Now I saw it for what it was. Guilt disguised as disdain, greed masquerading as righteousness. Back at Daniel's, I sat on the couch clutching the envelope, unable to open it. He noticed my silence, his brow furrowed, but I brushed him off with a shaky smile. I couldn't bring myself to tell him yet, not until I understood the full extent of what lay inside. The secret of the lottery had been heavy enough, but this new truth felt unbearable. My parents had not only rejected me, they had rewritten my life with lies, and the cruelest part was that I still longed for them, even knowing the truth. The heart is stubborn that way, clinging to hope, even when hope is poison. That night, I finally tore open the envelope. My grandmother's handwriting sprawled across the page, shaky but full of love. Stella, if you are reading this, know that I saw you. Always. You were never invisible to me. This gift is not money. It is freedom. Use it to build the life you deserve, not the one they allowed you to believe in. And never, ever doubt your worth. Tears blurred the words until they became rivers. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not by my parents, not by Emily, but by someone who had loved me enough to fight for me even after death. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, the letter pressed against my chest, my thoughts spiraling between grief and fury. The confrontation I had been avoiding all my life was now inevitable. My parents had stolen from me, erased me, betrayed the last person who had truly loved me. I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that the next time I saw them, I would no longer be silent. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made the betrayal sting more. I had grown careless in my secrecy, leaving my laptop open while Daniel stepped out to pick up groceries. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. Emily had stopped by unannounced, claiming she wanted to check in after weeks of silence. I didn't expect her to wander, to snoop, to dig her claws into a life I had tried to keep hidden. When I returned from the kitchen, she was sitting at my desk, eyes wide, mouth curved into a smile that was more knife than warmth. On the screen glowed my bank account, numbers so large they looked unreal, impossible. Her gaze snapped to me, triumphant. "You've been lying," she whispered, savoring the words like poison. My throat closed up, panic searing through me. "Emily, that's private," I said, rushing forward, but she didn't move, her eyes glued to the fortune I had concealed for years. She tilted her head, feigning innocence, but her voice trembled with greed. "All this time, you let us think you were barely surviving, begging for scraps, when you were sitting on millions?" Her words twisted my stomach. I opened my mouth to explain that it wasn't about greed, that the money had felt like a curse, that I had hidden it because love bought with wealth isn't real. But she didn't care about explanations. She saw only numbers, only power, and in her eyes, I was no longer her sister. I was prey. She stood, closing the laptop slowly as if sealing away evidence of a crime. "Does Mom and Dad know?" she asked, her tone calculated, her eyes glittering with something dangerous. My silence gave her the answer she wanted. A slow smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that precedes destruction. "They will," she said softly. "They'll know everything." My chest constricted, 1,000 memories flashing. Childhood games, whispered secrets, late-night giggles, all of it now reduced to this moment of exposure. I reached for her arm, desperate. "Please, Emily, don't. You don't understand." But she pulled away, her expression unreadable except for the hunger burning beneath her skin. When she left Daniel's apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, trembling. The betrayal felt like a knife lodged between my ribs, sharp and merciless. I had expected cruelty from my parents, but Emily, I had clung to the fantasy that at least she might see me, might one day soften. Instead, she had become the instrument of my undoing. I called her phone again and again, but she didn't answer. Each hour that passed was agony, knowing she was deciding how to use my secret against me. Would she run to our parents? Would she demand a share? Or worse, would she find a way to destroy me completely, just to ensure I stayed in the shadows where I had always been forced to live? That evening, my phone rang. Not Emily, but my father. The sound of his voice was calm, too calm, dripping with rehearsed civility. "Stella," he said, "your sister told us everything. Why don't you come over tomorrow so we can discuss matters?" The falseness of his tone chilled me to the bone. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. And though part of me wanted to hang up, to disappear, I felt the old pull of their authority, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. "I'll be there," I whispered, even as dread clawed at my stomach. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my grandmother's letter in my lap, tracing her words with trembling fingers. "Never doubt your worth." But how could I not, when my family had turned my very existence into currency, my pain into their profit? The thought of facing them made me nauseous, but something inside me hardened. I had lived in silence long enough. If they wanted confrontation, I would bring truth with me, no matter the cost. I folded the letter carefully, slipping it into my bag. If nothing else, I would carry her voice into that house like a shield. Daniel noticed my unrest and pressed me gently for answers, but I shook my head. Tomorrow, I whispered. Tomorrow I have to face them. He looked at me with concern, but didn't push. His kindness made the contrast even starker, his open door against my family's locked hearts. For a brief moment, I considered running away, leaving the city, vanishing into the anonymity of my fortune. But then I thought of Emily's eyes, the cruelty there, and I knew escape would only tighten her grip. The only way forward was through the fire. When morning came, I dressed slowly, as if preparing for battle. Every detail felt symbolic: the weight of my shoes, the knot of my hair, the envelope tucked into my bag. As I walked to my parents' house, the neighborhood seemed sharper, more hostile, as though it too knew the truth was about to fracture everything. Standing on their porch, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I thought of the night they had turned me away, of the look in my mother's eyes as she denied me even a place to sleep. My chest burned with the memory. This time, I wasn't coming as a beggar. I was coming as someone who finally carried the weight of truth. I rang the bell. Footsteps approached. And as the door swung open, I braced myself for the storm that was about to erupt, knowing there would be no turning back once the first word was spoken. The air inside the house was thick, almost suffocating, as I stepped into the living room where my parents sat waiting. Emily was already there, perched on the sofa like a cat that had cornered its prey. Her smile was faint but sharp, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. My father sat upright in his chair, hands folded neatly, his expression calm, but hard as granite. My mother stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, her mouth drawn in a thin line. The atmosphere was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I felt like a trespasser in my own bloodline, called to account for a crime I never committed. "Stella," my father said first, his voice controlled, almost rehearsed. "We've been made aware of your situation." He gestured slightly toward Emily, whose smug expression grew deeper. "All these years you've hidden this from us? Millions, and you never thought to share? To help your family?" His words dripped with accusation, as though he were the victim, and I, the thief. My hands trembled, but I steadied myself, drawing a long breath. "You mean the same family that left me on the porch when I begged for a place to sleep?" I asked quietly. The question cut through the air like glass, and for the first time, my father's mask cracked. My mother spoke next, her voice sharp, dismissive. "Don't twist this into something it's not, Stella. We had every right to be disappointed in you. You squandered opportunities, you refused responsibility, and now, instead of admitting your faults, you've been hoarding wealth while we struggled." Her words made me laugh bitterly, the sound foreign in my throat. "Struggled? While I starved? While I cried myself to sleep, you two lived comfortably. Because of me. Because you stole what Grandma left me. Don't you dare pretend this is about my failures." Her face paled at the mention of Margaret, but she said nothing. Her lips pressed tightly together. Emily shifted uncomfortably, but only for a moment. "You're being dramatic," she said with a sneer. "So what if Mom and Dad used what Grandma left? They raised us. They earned it. And you... Look at you, Stella. You wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway. You're too soft. You'd have wasted it." Her words burned hotter than fire, the contempt in them nearly unbearable. I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to break. "Too soft?" I repeated. "Too soft is what saved Daniel's home, what kept a stranger from drowning in debt. Too soft is what Grandma loved about me. It's not softness that destroys families, Emily. It's greed." My father rose slowly, his presence filling the room. His eyes, cold and sharp, bored into me with the same disdain I had grown up under. "You're speaking out of turn," he said. "You think you're better than us because of money? Because of pity handouts? Everything you are, everything you have, comes from this family. You owe us." His voice grew louder, more commanding, but something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't flinch. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady. "I owe you nothing. You took from me before I even knew what was mine. You turned my life into a wasteland, and still, I survived. The truth is, you owe me." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my mother's shaky breath. She looked at me with something close to fear, though she quickly disguised it with scorn. "Don't be foolish, Stella. You wouldn't have survived without us. We did what we had to. You're being ungrateful." I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter, holding it high for them to see. Ungrateful? Grandma saw me. She wrote to me. She trusted me. She left me the freedom you stole. This letter is proof you can't erase. My voice trembled, but not with fear, with fury and love entwined, a rope binding me to the truth I could no longer hide. Emily lunged forward, trying to snatch the letter from my hand, but I pulled back, clutching it against my chest. "Stop!" I cried, my voice echoing through the room. For a moment, everything froze, the three of them staring at me as though I had grown into something unfamiliar. And maybe I had. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore, the overlooked sister, the ghost they could dismiss. I was flesh and fire, and for once, they had to face me. My hands shook, but my words didn't waver. I am not invisible. Not anymore. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother turned away, as if unable to look at me. Emily glared, her anger brimming, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. They weren't used to this version of me, the version that fought back. The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Finally, I took a step toward the door, my chest heaving. I came here to give you a chance to tell the truth, to admit what you did, but you'd rather twist it, rather paint me as selfish. Fine, live in your lies. But know this, I don't need you anymore. I walked out, the letter pressed against my heart, my legs trembling but strong. Behind me, their voices rose in argument, accusations hurled, defenses shattered, the sound of a family fracturing under the weight of its own deceit. For years I had feared their rejection, their silence, their disdain. But as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something profound. The worst had already happened, and I was still standing. For the first time I felt free, not because of the money, not even because of Grandma's words, but because I had finally spoken mine. But freedom, I would soon learn, comes with a price. And the storm Emily had unleashed was only beginning to gather. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through a storm without cover. I couldn't shake the echo of their voices, the sting of Emily's smirk, or the weight of my father's final silence. Daniel tried to soothe me, reminding me that I had broken free, but I knew better. My family wasn't finished with me, not by a long stretch. That evening, a thick envelope slipped under Daniel's door confirmed it. Legal papers, accusations of fraud, demands for restitution. They were trying to take what they claimed I had stolen, twisting reality once again. My blood turned to ice. I wasn't just their disappointment anymore. I was their enemy. I sat on the floor with those papers scattered around me, my breath shallow. The audacity was staggering. They had stolen from me, cast me out, and now sought to destroy me entirely. My hands shook as I thought of Margaret, what she would say, what she would want me to do. And then a darker thought slithered in. Maybe Emily wasn't acting alone. The speed, the coordination, it felt too deliberate, too prepared. My parents had been waiting for this opportunity, and Emily was just the knife they wielded. I closed my eyes, trying to summon strength, but when the doorbell rang, my body tensed like prey, sensing the predator's approach. Emily stood there, alone, holding herself with a strange mix of defiance and desperation. Her eyes darted around Daniel's apartment, then landed on me. "We need to talk," she said quickly, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I almost slammed the door, but something in her tone stopped me. Reluctantly, I let her in, though my body burned with mistrust. She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers twisting together. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. Her voice trembled, though whether from guilt or fear I couldn't tell. I crossed my arms, waiting. She confessed slowly, haltingly, as though each word cost her something. "Mom and Dad, they made me do it. They knew about the money all along, Stella. They've always known." My stomach dropped. I stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean they knew?" "Margaret's letter." She shook her head violently. "They intercepted everything. They read her letters before you ever saw them. They twisted her words, made me deliver lies. They wanted to break you down, to make you believe you were unworthy, so you'd never resist when they took it all." My chest tightened, the ground tilting beneath me. The betrayal wasn't just Emily's. It had been orchestrated for years. Tears stung my eyes as I tried to comprehend the magnitude of it. My own parents, orchestrating a campaign to erase me, to keep me small. Emily's voice cracked as she went on. "I thought if I did what they asked, they'd finally love me. That's all I ever wanted. But they never loved either of us, Stella. They only loved control. The rawness in her words pierced something deep inside me. For the first time, I saw my sister not as a rival, not as a thief, but as another child, clawing for scraps of affection that never came. My anger wavered, replaced by a hollow ache. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream, to throw her out, to tell her she had destroyed me. But instead, I saw myself reflected in her trembling hands, in her desperate eyes. We were both daughters of the same barren soil, twisted by the same neglect. "Emily," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You could have told me. We could have faced them together." She shook her head, tears spilling now. "I was weak. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was sharp, but heavy with possibility, fragile, tentative, like a bridge half built over a canyon. The papers on the floor caught her eye, and her expression hardened. "They'll try to ruin you," she said. "They've done it before. They'll do it again. But this time, I'll stand with you." I wanted to believe her, but trust doesn't grow in poisoned soil. Still, I nodded, sensing that our survival depended on it. For the first time in years, we weren't just sisters by blood. We were allies forged in betrayal. And somewhere deep inside me, a spark of defiance flared brighter than my fear. If they wanted war, then war they would have. Days later, the final blow arrived. A meeting with their lawyers. My family sitting smug and certain, waiting to dismantle me. But I came armed, with Margaret's original letter, with records, with proof of their lies. And Emily, trembling but resolute, sat beside me. When she spoke against them, when she revealed the truth of their years of manipulation, I saw the fury in my father's eyes shatter into something else. Fear. For once, they weren't in control. For once, they faced the daughter they had underestimated. The room pulsed with the weight of it, the truth unraveling decades of deceit. I walked out of that meeting changed forever. They had tried to erase me, but instead they exposed themselves. Emily and I weren't whole. Not yet. Maybe never. But we had seen the truth together, and that was something they could never take back. I looked up at the sky as I left, Margaret's words echoing in my chest. "Never doubt your worth." I had kept a secret once, believing it would protect me. But now I understood. Secrets rot in the dark, while truth, however painful, sets fire to the chains. I was free. And for the first time in my life, I was not alone. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss the next stories.